You are listening to That's Not the Finish podcast, a no-holds-barred pro wrestling podcast perfect for getting your wrestling fix. Now get ready to call for the 3 count. 1, 2, 3. And try not to get DQ'd. Because here are your hosts.
That's Not the Finish here with the mastermind of Headlock Comics, Mike Kingston, live at New York Comic Con. So, Mike, how's everything going so far at New York Comic Con?
The show's been great. It's always one of our biggest shows of the year. Super wild, and this year's no exception. So we got Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Gangrel, Mick Foley, Sergeant Slaughter. So we've been lining them up down the aisle, jamming everything up. It's been a good time.
Sounds plenty eventful too.
Always. There's never a shortage of events and nonsense and chicanery that goes on at New York Comic Con.
Exactly. So I understand that you started off with a biochem degree from Hamilton College, and then you actually went on to build a self-publishing brand all from the ground up, while also working 70 hours a week. So can you tell us a little bit about the amount of grit and determination that really went into that?
I don't sleep a lot, I guess, is the thing, and you know, when you do what you love, I guess it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of days I don't sleep. There's a lot of days that I sleep a couple hours. Up until yesterday, I think I had slept 10 hours the whole week. So, there's certain times, but it's the only way it works. It's, this works the way it works now, and it's the only way that it would work. And, I'm always working for ways to make it bigger so that I don't have to work 2 jobs, but I like having the stability and the liquidity to do stuff. Like, I have a booth on this side of the building with, we're on the same side as Funko and Topps and Tokidoki and all these big brands and stuff, and we're right here in the middle of it, and no other comics brand is over on this side. They're in their section or they're in Artist Alley or whatever, but we're on the main floor and we're going toe to toe with the bigger brands, and I like to be able to do that, but that's you got to be liquid enough to say, hey, I've got X amount of dollars to spend on a booth 6 months in advance. And, you do that a couple times a year, with San Diego and C2E2 and Emerald City. And, none of those things are cheap. And we always make our money back. But it's about, I'd rather be liquid enough to take risks and make choices and not be like, well, if this show doesn't hit for me, I'm ruined. So it's part of the game right now. It might not be part of the game forever, in terms of having a second job, but it's gotten me where I've gotten, so I can't really knock it.
Exactly. It's just when you start going with something that you really love and really passionate about, it just almost isn't like work anymore. So what exactly inspired you to start making comics, and more specifically, like a wrestling comic?
So I love wrestling and I love comics since I was a kid, and in my mind, nobody ever made any good wrestling comics. I would buy all the wrestling comics, and they were always like wrestlers doing anything other than wrestling. There was Undertaker fighting demons and Kevin Nash's Mad Max and whatever, and like none of those were things that I really wanted to read about. Like, I wanted to read about wrestling, so it became apparent at some point that nobody was going to make the comic that I wanted to read, so I made it myself. And we started by selling it out of I sold out of my backpack at wrestling shows, on message boards and whatnot, and little by little, I worked 2 jobs for almost a year to pay for like a round of convention tables, and I started hitting the road and just building it from nothing. But it was just, to me, there was a need, and nobody was filling it, so I did it.
So exactly, like building it up from nothing. So you spent a good amount of time on the road, like between about 40 to 45 weekends a year promoting Headlock Comics, along with also creating the comics and collaborating with other wrestlers and celebrities, as well. So what was that like exactly?
It's both exhausting and as rewarding as you can think of. One of the things that happened when I started, Headlock, when I started, I didn't have anybody attached to it. It was just me doing my book and Artist Alleys and, wrestling shows. And then wrestlers who like comics would come up to me, and they would buy my books. They'd be like, oh, hey, this is really cool. And then, eventually guys would be like, hey, I want to do a comic book story. And, it grew from there. And then I hooked up with Jerry, and it just kind of started to grow. I just wanted to make a cool wrestling comic, and I've collaborated with like 40 different wrestlers on stories and art for the book, and it's been awesome.
So you met about around 40 different wrestlers, and you mentioned just previously that you got with Jerry Lawler to work with to work on Headlock Comics. So how exactly did you guys get started collaborating like that?
As far as Jerry goes, it's the dumbest thing, but I sent him a cold email through his website. Like, I forgot I did it after I did it. Like, it was so ridiculous. And he emailed me back. And then he said, "Here, send me some of your comics. I'll take a look at them." And so, honestly, at that point, I still thought it was like a webmaster or something that would send me this email. And then he called me, and obviously he's got a very distinctive voice. I mean, if there was a way to fake it, I would have, in my head, believed I would have faked it. I never thought in a million years that Jerry Lawler was calling me on the phone. And now he's like one of my best friends, and it's a ridiculous thing to have happen. But I mean, it's been great. Like, we go to art museums and stuff. Like, it's funny because people don't know Jerry. Like, I know Jerry. Like, a lot of times people just assume your online or your on-air persona is who you are, but he's a different guy. I mean, like I said, we go to art museums and nerd out about like paintings and stuff, and I mean, obviously he's still somewhat that person. I don't think you can ever truly be like a 100% fake person, but he's one of the most generous people I know. Like, I've watched him do so many good things for so many people, and he's really cool, and he's super, super creative. So it's probably been one of the most rewarding relationships in my life.
Definitely. Really awesome how you guys developed that relationship. So I understand that Headlock Comics isn't your only published work either. You also have a series known as Comics, Cosplay, and Carbohydrates. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So it's a YouTube show that I do. It's basically a little travelogue involving my my convention travels and the restaurants I eat at, because I'm also somewhat known for finding really good places to eat and taking lots of food pictures and stuff. And so people are always like, "Oh, I'd love to see more of that." So I started filming a little travelogue about my sort of weird life that I have, this like nomadic restaurant nerd life thing, and it's a lot of fun. It's another thing, because I can't stop giving myself things to do, but it's a lot of fun to put together. We filmed a little scene with Booker T where I was telling him what I ate for breakfast, and he says, "Tell me you didn't just eat that," and just dumb fun things with my wrestling friends.
Gotcha. So when it goes into creating comics, what would you say is your greatest strength?
I feel like I try to boil the stories down to their simplest, and I try to make everything accessible to people. One of the things over the years, like, comics has gotten very focused on a very core group of hardcore fans, and it's almost to me like if you pick up a superhero comic today, like, it's almost, they're not, you see all these characters on these simple distilled versions of these characters on movies, and then you read them in the comics and they're just so complicated. And I mean, some of them are like encyclopedias, and I just try to make accessible stories that people can follow and relate to and not get overly complicated in the weeds, because at the end of the day, you want something to be fun and easy to read. And I feel like I like continuity, and I like rewards and payoffs for long-time readers, but I think everybody should be able to read a book and be able to understand it without having read 14 chapters previous.
So would you say that, having that ability to do like distill complex topics and storylines, would you say that was something that you were able to develop over time, that like you basically had to learn from?
I guess to a certain extent. I think everybody has to learn it to a degree, but I think, I don't know. I guess I've always considered myself a storyteller, so I think it's just, every medium's a little different. You know what I mean? Like, to me, wrestlers are storytellers, and they just tell their stories with a different brush, so to speak. And so, I mean, I've had to, like, obviously get better, and I think the more you do it, the more you do anything, I think the better you get at it. So it's just but I think on some level, I think I've always been a storyteller.
Yeah, definitely. So your comics have featured some of the top female wrestlers in the industry today, such as Lita, Trish Stratus, and most recently Becky Lynch. So what other women wrestlers would you like to try to feature?
I mean, honestly, like, I just want to work with people. Like, I'll work with anybody. Like, everybody's got a story to tell. Everybody's got something interesting about them. Everybody's got something to them, you know. Everybody's seen stuff and done stuff and has a different way of looking at things. And I mean, I just want to. That's the stuff that I'm interested in. Like, I don't necessarily care about the name per se. I mean, you know, obviously the names are going to draw people to your booth and draw people to your ideas and stuff or whatever. But like, I just want to do the most interesting stuff. I mean, and you know, I mean, Lita's so interesting as a human. Like, she's amazing. And Trish, I mean, has had such a crazy life to go from like a fitness model to be like one of the greatest female wrestlers of all time. And Becky's got a great story. She's so cool, you know. So, I mean, I just want to hear, you know, I want to work with everybody, honestly, like, because like I said, everybody's got a story.
Yeah, and that's, you know, the thing about pro wrestling is that you're able to like detail these stories out and, you know, in their work. So, you know, in terms of women's wrestling too, there was WOW, which has been like resurfaced again. And you also had a comic that came out that was focused around WOW. So did you used to watch that promotion back in the day when it was the original WOW? And seeing its reemergence, what exactly made you interested in creating that issue?
I think as far as WOW goes, we have them, like, they have the most sort of confluence with what we do. Like, I mean, they're basically doing comic book superheroes. I mean, they refer to themselves as WOW superheroes. So, I mean, they have more, you know, like the greatest confluence, I guess, with comics out of any of the wrestling promotions. And I mean, David McLean to me is a real interesting guy. I mean, he created Glow and then Soul Glow, and then he's created WOW. And I mean, he's one of the guys that really gets it in wrestling. I mean, I deal with people all the time. I deal with promoters, I deal with bookers and whatnot. And like, to me, a lot of people have somewhat lost what wrestling is. And he really understands it better than a lot of people.
Awesome. So would you ever like to feature some of the Joshi wrestling promotions, or even like see about the Joshi wrestling, like Stardom, for example?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother world, you know? I mean, I love the entire culture of wrestling. Like, I'd love to, you know, like right now, like the stories we tell in Headlocked are mostly sort of based on, you know, the kid breaking in, you know, Mike Hartman breaking in. But like, I mean, I want to take him everywhere, and I want to touch on everything. So yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, on the topic of, you know, like the kid breaking in, so to speak, one issue that that I really loved with Headlocked was the one about Mustafa Ali, how it took from his experiences, his past real-life experiences as a cop, and also just like what he had to go through in the ring and some of the adversity he had to overcome. So what was it like, you know, working with him on that issue, and like what parts of that like really hit you emotionally? Did anything, you know, hit you emotionally?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, to me, like, Mustafa Ali is like the ultimate babyface in wrestling. I think he is like a real-life superhero. I think both in the style that he wrestles and with the grace that he carries himself with. I mean, I think he's probably, I mean, I don't want to say underutilized, but he's probably the most underutilized wrestler. Like, I think he is, like, he's everything you want a babyface to be, but he's really that guy. Like, you're never going to have a weird Mustafa Ali scandal or something. I mean, he's just the nicest dude, and he has like such an important mission, and he handles, like I said, the way he handles it, the way he handles online trolls, and the things that he's done, and the way he deals with people on a human level it's unparalleled, man. I think he's really an impressive talent.
He's really like down to earth, really chill, really, you know, seems like a great guy. Just kind of circling back a little bit more about how you got the success for Headlocked. So you plan and executed 4 successful Kickstarter campaigns, totaling about 100,000. Can you tell us a bit about what was like really key to the success of launching and like getting those campaigns fully funded?
It's a grind, man. I gain about 15 pounds in stress weight every time I do a Kickstarter. It's the best and the worst thing I ever do, just because it gets everything funded, and it helps us pay for our books, and, you know, allows me to pay my artists and my printers and stuff. I mean, I don't see any of that money, but I don't really care, you know what I mean? I just want to get my books out into the world. But it's nerve-wracking. You just gotta bang the drum, and you gotta find different ways to get people excited. Like we had one that ran across Halloween, and I knew nobody was going to pay attention on Halloween, so we just did like this flash zombie Hogan print that was train, say your prayers and eat your brains, that everybody loved, you know, and it just got people looking at us. You know, it's just finding ways to keep people's attention, because it's difficult, you know, particularly on the weekends and you know, on holidays and stuff, when your Kickstarters run across those. So, but yeah, it's nerve-wracking. It's very nerve-wracking. I'm probably going to have 2 more this year. We're finishing up the hard way this next week, and then we're doing a collection of Tales from the Road stories, and we're doing, you know, we'll start on Volume 5.
Awesome. Excited to see those. So what wrestler, or if you had to pick, like what wrestler or wrestlers would you say inspired you the most? And have you met any of them in person and worked with them at all?
So this is going to sound like a cop-out, but Jerry Lawler 100% inspires me. Like, he is, like, people, like, everybody kind of knows him in his current persona or whatever, but I mean, like, he did, like, to me, he's responsible for so many concepts that are important in modern wrestling today. Like, he did everything first. Like, he wrestled, like, he did the Andy Kaufman celebrity tie-in. He did, you know, other people weren't doing that. I mean, Andy Kaufman originally was trying to get into WWE, you know, or WWF at the time, and they wouldn't use him, you know, and he went to Memphis, and it became a thing. So, you know, he did that first. He did, you know, he had monsters wrestle, you know, and he had a Dr. Frankenstein monster and a Wolfman monster, and, you know, wrestle as heels, and he had Adam West on his show in Memphis as Batman. You know, he did everything. Before the famous picture that everybody mocks of Shawn Michaels with the belt across him, like, he did that first with a crown in front of him, like the naked shot or whatever. Like Jerry did everything first. Like 90% of ECW was ripped right out of Memphis, and they just, you know, history's history, and then, you know, obviously the WWE has created their own version of history, and that's ultimately how history will be remembered. But to me, like, from a creativity standpoint, like, nobody will ever touch Jerry Lawler.
Awesome. So what would you say is your favorite moment in wrestling history, and were you able to capture this in any of your comics yet?
My single greatest experience as a wrestling fan, it's funny because I grew up 2.5 hours north of New York City. I grew up in upstate New York, and I didn't go to the city for the first 30 years of my life. And so when I was a kid, New York City wasn't the best place to go. I mean, if you watch any movie in the 80s, there's always some dude with a mohawk and a switchblade and whatnot, and that's what you were taught, like, New York was, you know. And obviously now it's like Disneyland. But I came to New York 14 years ago this week for Samoa Joe versus Kenta Kobashi, and that was the single greatest live experience I've ever had as a wrestling fan. I would put the 800 people in that New Yorker ballroom up against any crowd anywhere in terms of, like, per capita voice. Like, nobody will ever recreate that moment again. Like, wrestling is so, like, out there now, you know what I mean? It's so exposed. Like, Japan is like an accessible thing, you know. When I was a kid, like, it wasn't. Like, you would read about stuff, or if you know, you had to trade for tapes and whatnot. So to have a guy like that come to the United States and then wrestle like the hottest guy in the Indies, and then have the match be as amazing as it was, like, I remember, like, watching, like, the wrestlers were all up on the balcony watching it, and they were going crazy. Like, I mean, everybody in the building was screaming their head off, and it was amazing. That's my and I mean, listen, I've been to probably 15 WrestleManias. I mean, I was at the Survivor Series, the Screwjob. I was at the Royal Rumble '92. I was at the Trump WrestleMania. I mean, I've seen a lot of history in wrestling live, but nothing in my mind will ever touch Samoa Joe and Kenta Kobashi.
Interesting. So my last question for you is, with all the wisdom and experience that you gained with the comic industry and meeting so many different, you know, wrestlers and you know, people in this career, what advice would you give anybody who's just looking to chase their own dreams, no matter what it is?
You got to do it. You can't talk about it. You know, people come up to me all the time and say, I had an idea for you know, somebody came up to me last week, like, I had an idea for a zombie comic one time. It was, you know, but then they did The Walking Dead already and whatnot. And look, The Walking Dead's great, but I mean, it's not Shakespeare. You know what I mean? Like, Robert Kirkman wrote that book. He just did it. You know what I mean? It's not spectacular. Somebody else could do something that's comparable, it's not. I don't. I say it's not spectacular because I mean I've read all the books and watched all the movies, so obviously I like it. But you know what I mean? Like, you just got to do it. I'm a biochemistry degree. Like, I taught myself to create comics. Like, you know, lots of people, you know, get trained to be a wrestler. You know what I mean? Whatever your dream is, like, you have to do it. You have to recognize that you're gonna suck at it, and you can't worry about it for, you know, you just keep doing it until you get better at it. You have to learn. You have to have thick skin. Like, when somebody says, "Hey, this isn't very good," you have to take that and be like, "Okay, maybe it isn't. What can I do better?" You know, and that's what I always try to do. Like, when you know, when I face different challenges, you know, and I've had a lot of challenges over the years. You know, Image put out a book called Ringside, and I was like, oh man, it was very similar to my book, and I was kind of, you know, at first I was bummed about it, but then, like, whatever, it made me work harder. It made me seek out, pushed me out of my comfort zone. You know, for this show in particular, I had a very different lineup 3 months ago, and then WWE pulled my entire lineup for SmackDown. So I had to build my lineup from scratch, and it forced me to reach out of my comfort zone and find, you know, to meet people that I didn't have a relationship with yet to get this booth to pull off. So you just got to do it. Like, you can't talk about it. You can't be like, oh, this is my dream. Like, because I see guys all the time. They're like, it's my dream to be a wrestler. And you know what? They got $60 to buy the latest version of WWE 2K, and they got, you know, they always got tickets for every wrestling show that come to town, but somehow they don't ever have money for wrestling school. You know what I mean? Like, you got to do it, and you got to suck at it, and then you get better at it, and that's it, man. It's just the hardest thing is taking that first step. You know, my first edition of Headlocked is called A Single Step, but that's what they say. You know, every journey begins with a single step, and that first step sucks. So. It's but that's it, man. It's just doing it, and there's no amount of talking about it, and nobody's gonna give you what you want. Nobody's gonna, no Richard Gere's gonna show up in a limo with a bunch of flowers and give you the life that you want. You know what I mean? You just gotta put the elbow grease behind it, because nobody gives a shit about you. You know what I mean? Like, and that's a horrible thing to say, but nobody's gonna care more about you than you. I mean, if you know what I mean, because if they had the ability to make a dream come true, they're gonna make their dream come true. Why are they gonna make your dream come true? So you just gotta. It's all elbow grease, man. That's it. Elbow grease and a thick skin.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us, and also just thank you so much for taking the time out and doing the interview.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. I do feel like, for whatever we've achieved here, I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and I feel like I've acquired a certain amount of wisdom. So I do like to try to help people, like, if they've got issues and stuff and need help breaking in. I do try to give people advice when I can, and it's a good space for everybody.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and be sure to check out Headlock Comics, and we'll catch you again on another episode of That's Not the Finish.